This is Dame Pasty with WatchersOnTheWall.com here with your weekly brush-up of last week's episode entitled Dance of Dragons. I have speculation scattered throughout the video, but nothing too spoilerish. All real spoilers will be at the end. Now let's get started. We start in Stannis' camp somewhere near Winterfell. Melisandre, who appears to be the worst seer in the history of Westeros, does not see Ramsay's attack coming, and then watches, somewhat bewildered, while tents, horses, and people go up in flames. Here's a thought. Maybe she didn't miss it at all. Maybe she did see it in a vision, but didn't prevent it because she knew it would put Stannis in very dire straits, and then he would break down and let her sacrifice Shireen, because we all know she loves some burning. And even if she didn't see it coming, how come she has power over fire but couldn't put out Ramsay's flames? I mean, she's just standing there watching it happen. And it reminds me of the other priestess that Tyrion saw in Volantis that said Dany was Azor Ahai. Does that make Mel wrong? Does it mean that R'hllor is sending her erroneous visions, or simply partial visions that she assumes she knows how to interpret? I've said it many, many times. Mel doesn't know the context of her visions, and she could be totally and completely wrong on some of them, particularly the ones that matter most. Next we go to see Jon and the wildlings that survived Hardhome. They've arrived at the wall, north of the wall in fact, at the Castle Black Gate. Many people questioned why they arrived north of the gate and not south. Well, the answer's pretty simple. If they sailed south of the wall and then tried to march a couple of thousand wildlings through the war-torn north, any northern lord they came across would have attacked them. If they'd sailed north through the Shivering Sea and landed there, they would be just as vulnerable to the White Walkers. The smartest way to do it was to sail south between Westeros and the Isle of Skagos and land just north of the wall, where they have a straight, shorter march to the northern gate of Castle Black, with no opposition in the way. Anyway, Jon's standing there and waiting to see if his men will obey his orders. It did make for a good bit of drama for a moment there, because it seemed like Sir I just ate a bushel of lemons-faced Thorne might not let them in. Once inside, Sam comforts Jon, who is saddened by all the people he couldn't save, and then Jon notices how many of the Night's Watchmen are looking at him with open hostility, including Ollie. Could they hit us over the head any harder with Ollie's defection, do you think? My favorite part of this scene was seeing the giant. I want more Woon-Woon, damn it. Back in Stannis' camp the next morning, we see Davos being sent to Castle Black to ask for food and horses from Jon, and every watcher everywhere was talking to the TV saying, "For the love of all that's holy, don't leave Shireen alone with that witch and her crazy-ass parents!" Davos does his best to convince Stannis to let his daughter and or wife to go back with him to Castle Black, but Stannis is insistent that they have to stay with him. Stannis felt so guilty he couldn't even look at Davos while saying this. Davos knows he has to go, so he stops by to say goodbye to Shireen. A lot of people thought that Davos knew she would die, but if that was the case, he wouldn't have left her. I think he knew that being in a siege was dangerous for her, and he had a general bad feeling about her being there, but I don't think he really knew what was going to happen. Anyway, I really enjoyed this scene between the two of them. The actors play so nicely off of one another, and you can tell they have a genuine affection for each other. I also like the story that Shireen tells from the Dance of Dragons, about a knight who thought he could fool a dragon with an illusion. The dragon saw through the illusion, i.e. cut through the bullshit. I'm hoping this metaphor continues when Dany arrives in Westeros, because someone needs to cut through all the bullshit that people are pushing, and in particular, I mean Mel. Next, we're off to Dorne, where we finally get to see Doran show his savvy. It didn't bother me that Jaime got all paternal about Myrcella's dress, and I liked the fact that Jaime was honest. He was there because he thought Myrcella was in danger, and he was right. The danger was sitting right next to him in the form of Ellaria. It was pretty apparent that it was Ellaria who had sent the necklace threat, and not Cersei, as some had thought. Doran plays nicey-nice with Jaime, and Ellaria gets pissed off and refuses to play nice in the sandbox, and Doran does not like it one bit. In the end, they agree to send Myrcella back to Craft's Landing with Trystane in tow, and he will serve on the small council. I'm wondering if Doran will have Myrcella and Trystane married before they go. Now that would be a smart move on his part. Finally, Jaime tries to rescue Bronn from an anticipated execution by trying to take the blame. And speaking of Bronn, we go down to the jail cells and have to watch Charlie's Angels play patty cake. I didn't enjoy that part except for the massive slap at the end, and I really didn't see the point of the whole scene. Maybe the writers will make it worth something in the next episode. Anyway, Bronn is released and presented to Doran. Trystane has decided Bronn's punishment will not be execution but a hard blow to the face. The only problem is, Trystane doesn't do it himself. That was a serious fail. Whoosh across the sea to Braavos, where we see Arya as Lana selling her seashells down by the seashore. Some jackhammers come onto her, and it gives me the heebies. But there are more heebies to come, because just as she's getting ready to kill the Thin Man, she sees Mace, I'm So Clueless Tyrell, and Sir Meereen, I Like Little Girls Trant arrive. She's stunned and just can't help following them around town until that night where she sees Trent enter a brothel, and she sees him ordering up a barely pubescent girl for the night, and he orders another one for the next night, too. There's a couple of scary moments where they make it seem like Trent might have recognized Arya, but afterward I was thinking maybe it wasn't that he recognized her, but that he was sexually attracted to her, which makes me think that Arya is going to go back in the next episode and be the girl selected by Trent. I'm betting that she won't use her own face, but one from the House of Black and White, and since she lied to Jaqen about what she was doing, I think she's going to steal that face. Now, why would Jaqen not let on that he knows she's lying? Because he's testing her, of course. So then we zoom back to Dorne, where we see Doran telling Ellaria to swear allegiance or die. I like to see the steely side to Doran, and there's no doubt he will kill a bitch if she doesn't comply. The Sand Snakes were watching and clearly didn't like it. I thought Castle Hughes was putting too much into her expression, like she was emoting, overacting, or something. But I didn't mind Ellaria's tears because they are the result, I would presume, of her having to give up the pursuit of vengeance for Oberyn's death. That would make her sad, so it makes sense. But then she goes and sees Jaime, and she's all kinds of nice. That scene I just didn't understand. Again, maybe the writers will give us something in the final episode that explains this complete turnaround, but I don't have much hope for the Dorne storyline. Bada boom, bada bing, we're back in northern Westeros, and Stannis visits Shireen in her tent. From the mouth of babes often comes so much truth. Stannis asks whose side Shireen would choose in the history book she is reading, and she says neither. She says it was the choosing that caused all the problems in the first place. Too bad that Stannis is incapable of trying to find an alternative solution to his problems, which we will see soon is much to Shireen's detriment. It broke my heart to hear Shireen offer to help her father, knowing that Stannis the jerk would interpret that as her willingly making the sacrifice, or interpreting it that it was just meant to be. I have to hand it to Carrie Ingram. She sold me on her terror. Those screams were really horrific, and I cried. And then Selyse suddenly deciding that she cared about her child, that really just made me angry. I have no sympathy for that crazy biatch. Seriously, not one little tiny drop of sympathy. And, I've said this before, I'm never like Stannis, and this is the perfect example of why. And you know who I like even less? Mel. A ton of people are hating on Stannis, but I see a lot less hate for Melisandre online, and I don't understand why. Finally, we end up Meereen in the largest fighting pit. Dany is styling and profiling as usual. Hizdahr is late and disdainful of both Tyrion and Dany's distaste of the entire concept of killing as entertainment. Then Daario starts comparing the size of his male member with Hizdahr, and Dany sits by and is mildly amused by the exchange. Tyrion is much less amused because he's totally over the whose dick is bigger banter. He does manage to get in a few jibes at Hizdahr himself, however. Tyrion says, "There's always been more than enough death in the world for my taste. I can do without it in my leisure time." A little irritated, Hizdahr responds, "What great thing has ever been accomplished without killing or cruelty?" Then Tyrion does this awesome thing where he privilege checks Hizdahr and retorts, "It's easy to confuse what is with what ought to be, especially when what is has worked out in your favor." Hizdahr says some more bullshit, and Tyrion mutters, "My father would have liked you." Now that made me laugh. Finally, their banter is interrupted when they hear Jorah's voice in the fighting pit. If Jorah couldn't be with Dany, he'd just rather die, and he would rather she watch it happen so that she could see how devoted he was to her. And that's some crazy stalker shit. But we still love Jorah, so it's okay. I think Emilia Clarke did a great job of emoting her feelings about Jorah and how torn she was. She was fearful of him losing his life. She didn't want to watch it happen. That's why she didn't kill him before. She exiled him. But if she had stopped the fighting, they would have had a massive riot on their hands. Tyrion was also seriously concerned for him, and he wanted Dany to stop it too. And in a Deus Ex Machina kind of thing, Jorah wins. And thank goodness, because if he hadn't, he wouldn't have been there to throw the spear that kills the son of the Harpy that was slowly creeping up on Dany that no one else seemed to have seen, which happens a few minutes later. And for saving her life, Dany accepts Jorah back. Now, I know they touched hands, but it was his right hand that he touched her with, not the left hand where he had the outbreak of grayscale. Maybe it's only direct contact with a patch of the grayscale that's contagious, and that's why the stone men are so dangerous, because every inch of their skin is covered with it. The review stand where Dany is sitting is quickly overrun by Sons of the Harpy, and it's not long before Hizdahr is stabbed to death, and he dies, which basically kills my theory that he was behind the Sons of the Harpy all along. And does it really matter if there's anybody behind the Sons of the Harpy? I'm not so sure that it does at this point. Next we see Tyrion saving Missandei from the Son of the Harpy, and they try to get out of the arena, and they can't, and they end up stuck in the middle and surrounded. And guess who comes to save the day? It's Mr. Badass Dragon Drogon. Now, I love the graphics of the stadium. I love seeing him fighting and flying in, and they were great. But when Dany started to climb on his back, then it kind of got a little cheesy, but not too bad. I mean, Lord knows I've seen worse. But even though they weren't stellar at the end, the graphics didn't take me out of the story, I still was very happy. I shed tears of joy at this time. I also love what it means for the characters, too. In particular, Tyrion, he might not have fully believed in anything in his life, but now what he's seen with Dany, he will be all in, and I want to see that. One last thing. Many people said Dany was wrong to leave her advisors and soldiers behind with so many harpies still left. But she was the target, and if she's gone, they're much less of a target and much less danger. Furthermore, if you take a real close look of the aerial shot as she's flying away, there's nobody left standing around her buds that are in the middle of the theater, so they're good. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for joining me. The Saturday after the season finale, I will have a brush up for the off season where I review the final episode. I hope you'll join me then. So I'm predicting that Arya will steal one of the faces from the House of Black and White, and Jaqen will find out, and he'll be pissed. So will he punish her by making her blind like he did in the books? Or will he just kick her out because the show doesn't have time? I mean, don't they need to speed up her journey back to Westeros? And who doesn't think that Arya has to go back to Westeros? I mean, clearly all the storylines must converge in Westeros. And if they don't, I would be very, very surprised. So I just don't see him making her go blind, but then again, who knows? I have a few questions about Ellaria and the Sand Snakes. Since Ellaria swore to Doran, will she break that promise? We know in the books that Myrcella gets her ear chopped off because one Dornish party wants to make her queen, and the other Dornish party wants to kill her, and she ends up losing an ear. But if Ellaria breaks her promise, she's dead. Maybe the Sand Snakes didn't swear because we didn't see it, so I don't know what's going to happen there. And then, do you think once Ellaria swore allegiance to Doran that he told her about her long-term plan? Because why was she so nice to Jaime all of a sudden? It just doesn't make sense. And does that long-term plan mean that they need to lull the Lannisters into thinking Dorne is not a threat? And if so, why is that the case? How many of you think that long-term plan is the alliance of Dorne with Dany, and that was set up via Varys quite a while ago? That's the only reason I can think of Ellaria going in to see Jaime and being nice, that she's in on Doran's plan and she agrees with it. Again, I have lots of questions about Mel and Stannis. What if Stannis' attack on Winterfell isn't successful, and that makes Melisandre realize he's not Azor Ahai? Is that going to be the thing that makes her abandon him? How is Davos going to find out that Shireen was burned? Do you think someone like Selyse will send a message via bird to Castle Black? I think somehow, someway, Davos is going to find out while he's at Castle Black. But then again, maybe they'll let him return to Winterfell or the area around Winterfell to find Stannis and find that she's dead. But I do know with all my heart that Davos, there's no way he'll stay loyal to Stannis. He will definitely be leaving him. A lot of people were saying, oh, Stannis doesn't kill his daughter in the books. Well, we don't know that yet. D&D have said that George told them that Shireen dies. They didn't specifically mention how. But even if Stannis doesn't have a direct hand in her death, I'm betting that he plays a role in it somehow, to the point of condoning her death or her sacrifice, even if it's from afar. And I think it's totally in Stannis' character, both in the book and the show. I actually think George has been working towards this fall for Stannis' character for some time now. Consider this quote from the books. When Aemon was dying, he tried to warn Sam about Melisandre and Stannis, and he said, "The sword is wrong. She has to know that. Light without heat and empty glamour. The sword is wrong, and the false light can only lead us into deeper darkness." Now we know what that deeper darkness is. It's death. And I fail to see how death by fire is any better than death by ice. It's all still just death. So as far as I'm concerned, Melisandre is just as bad as the White Walkers, and they're just two different extremes of evil. I'm wondering if Shireen's story from the Dance of Dragons, that history book about the knight who gets burnt to a crisp, is foreshadowing that someone is going to get burnt in the final episode. We know from the books that Quentyn arrives from Dorne and ends up being dead, but we don't have a Quentyn on the show, and still we know that someone needs to release the other two dragons. So who's it going to be? I sure hope it isn't Tyrion, because you will see some serious crocodile tears from me if that happens.